the Ottawa Jewish Historical Society on Monday, June the 13th. Rabbi Bulka will be speaking about the highlights of his wonderful rabbinic experience at Machzikei Hadas.
How does one introduce a man who needs no introduction? I've thought about this all day, Since 1967, Rabbi Bulka has been a part of the fabric of not only the Ottawa Jewish community, but also of the Ottawa community at large. He came to Ottawa from New York to be the rabbi of Machzikei Hadas, then on Murray Street. The murals from that shul, otherwise known as the Peddler's Shul, are in the lobby of the JCC. And Rabbi Bulka is still the rabbi of Machzikei Hadas. During this time, Rabbi Bulka has written and published more than 30 books and over 100 scholarly articles. He has been hosting a weekly phone-in show on CFRA on Sunday nights. He's often in the weekly newspaper column, Ask the Religion Experts. He has been active, often as chair or co-chair of too many charitable organizations, both local and national, for me to mention. And with all this, he's still an active family man, husband, father, grandfather. Does that count as an introduction? And now Rabbi Bulka will tell us his stories of his wonderful rabbinic experience in Ottawa.
Thank you very much, Anna. It's a particular thrill to be welcomed and introduced as a guest speaker in your own shul, which I appreciate very much. The first thing I want to say is that this evening, what I share with you is not about me, it's about all of you. If anybody would have told me 44 years ago, when I first came here for an interview, that I would still be in Ottawa 44 years later, I've told them they were nuts. Totally crazy. And yet, here I am. How did it happen? So there are too many coincidences, too many might have beens, could have beens, that it's almost impossible to relegate it to chance. There were so many things that happened, and on a shul level, always very positive, that when something like this, and you take a look at it backwards from so many years, you have to say, thank God. That's number one. Thank God for everything that happened. Grateful for everything. Grateful for great clergy that I worked with over the course of the years. Grateful for a staff over the course of time that I worked with and were always extremely dedicated. Grateful to an incredible array of presidents, one after the other, being really outstanding. Not only great volunteers, but passionate about the shul. You don't know until you're actually in it how much time, energy, effort, and koiches go into being a president. And how much I'm grateful not only to the presidents, but also to their wives, because it was a great sacrifice for them of precious family time. Without all this, nothing would have happened. We would have closed, things would have been finished, and people would have gone their merry way. But that's not the way it happened. So I share with you a number of stories tonight about how it unfolded, full of gratitude and appreciating that I have had the opportunity, being around for so many years, to speak to many of my colleagues in the Rabbinic, and I know how easily a rabbinical life in a congregation can go off the rails. So the fact that it's still on track is a tribute to your patience and to your whatever you are, nice, understanding people. It all began, my rabbinical career began very early. I was already practicing as a rabbi without a license at the age of 16, through circumstances beyond my control, because at that point in time I wasn't exactly sure I was going to become a rabbi. But my father, who I've tried to model my rabbinic life after, and with moderate success, not nearly coming up to the type of rabbi that he was, my father suffered a massive heart attack. In those days, they didn't have coronary bypass, they didn't have all sorts of stents and medications that allowed you to come back from a heart attack almost a week or two later. He was in bed for 6 months. That's the way they treated a heart attack. My father at that point in time, it's interesting how our careers parallel. He was in the midst of taking a shul in a dying neighborhood in the East Bronx. Anybody who knows anything about New York geography knows the East Bronx is not a place where you would want to have a shul. But for a long time it was the place where Jewish people actually flourished. But then the neighborhood went down and my father refused to let the shul die. And he wanted to move the shul to a better neighborhood, which was the Pelham Parkway, which has since gone the way of the East Bronx in a different direction, but still barely now. We visited the place a few years ago. The only way that they can have a minyan is they combine two shuls that used to be a few blocks apart and now have decided one Shabbat here, one Shabbat there. It's the only way they can have a minyan. And the minyan, the average age of the minyan when we were there was 92. So it doesn't bode well there for what's going to happen. So when my father got sick, and it's very likely that this is all was the result of his basically overworking, that I was pressed into emergency service. Congregation didn't have the money to get a rabbi. And you know what happens when someone is not well? What's the things you don't want to do is get a rabbi, which is a nice way of saying you're finished and we're starting with someone else. So they didn't do that, which was part of the sensitivity. So I ended up speaking and doing everything that a rabbi does short of marrying people off and doing funerals. So for a long time, I was actually a practicing rabbi, I guess, without a license. Even when my father did recover, we had at that point in time two shuls, the one that was sliding down and the one that was coming up. So we would alternate on Shabbat. Wherever my father went, I went to the other place to look after that shul. So I got my school, but by the time I came here, even though I was 21 years old or something like that, I don't remember how old I was, somebody 21, 22. I was already a veteran of 5 years in that. So that's how it all started. And then, after I finished my rabbinical degree and I finally got the license, and I got married, and I started looking for rabbinical positions. And I went from one shul to another. At that stage in time, you're looking for small shuls, because big shuls were hiring already people only that had some experience. So, needless to say, for whatever reason, I looked young. I looked younger than I was. I was 21 years old, but I probably could have passed for 16. Not that I would have wanted to, but I could have. And wherever I went, they said, you're okay, but you're too young. Not so much that you are too young, but you look too young. Fine, okay. Then God helped, Tisha B'Av came. And there's a certain regulation that for 3 weeks before Tisha B'Av you're not supposed to shave, so I didn't shave. And then after Tisha B'Av I said, you know what? Instead of shaving off the entire beard, which I had done all my life, I said, I'll make a little bit of one of these a goatee. And the first shul that I came to after the goatee was Mafsike Hadas. It's in the record book. The funny thing is that there is a member of the selection committee who had a chance a little while later to see a picture of myself without the beard. And he said that had I come without it, they wouldn't have hired me. So this goatee was a good move. And you know, like a manager has a winning streak, so I still have kept it. This is the same exact one. Different color, but it's the exact same one. So, for some reason or other, I don't know why, because I know there were a number of other candidates, they took a risk. There's a big risk on their part because they had people that had much experience who had applied for the job. And I was hired. There are some people around, I'm not sure they're here tonight, who were actually there on the selection committee. But they're children of those that were on the selection committee that are here. And one of the things that they asked me was, would I stick around if the shul was going to move? So at that point in time, this was like a faint hope, because the shul had somewhere a little bit less than 100 members. The average age, probably not 92, but maybe a dyslexic 92, something like 62. 65, maybe 70. And I said, I gave my word. I said, yeah, if you're going to do it, I'll be around. Then there's actually lots of advantage in starting small. There's not a lot of pressure. You can do a lot of things. I often remark to my father that I felt badly for him because in New York it would take him 3 or 4 hours in a day just to visit one patient in a hospital in Midtown Manhattan. And I was able, and one of the things that I look back at and say, okay, so what was the secret of whatever success you may have? I would say that it involved a number of things. Number one, that I made it my business from the get-go to visit every single Jewish patient who was in any hospital. In those days it was easier to do because the Queensway Carlton was not around. I don't even think that the Ottawa General was not around yet. It was in a different configuration. It wasn't a hospital. There were very few hospitals. The Riverside Hospital actually started the year that I came here. It was in 1967. So it was very easy to do. And since I had a lot of time, relative to now, I actually would go and, if the situation would allow it, spend a lot of time with people in the hospital. This was not a strategy to gain more members for the shul. This was, simply speaking, the way that I thought a rabbi has to be. People are not well, it's a mitzvah to visit them, and that's what you do. Really. The other thing that I did, which again was not planned, was to join the Jewish men's softball league. And you may laugh and say, okay, what does it have to do with the Rabbinic? Truth of the matter is that I met on the baseball field, when it was then a truly Jewish league, lots of people. Parents of youngsters who were playing, youngsters themselves who were playing, who found it a little bit odd that a rabbi should be playing baseball. And what's even more odd is I never put on a baseball uniform. I always took my jacket off and played in my suit pants. As a matter of fact, I remember one particular day when we were in the finals of a championship, which had gone, it was 3 out of 5, and it was 2-2. And I had to come, I was supposed to pitch that night. That was the days when I could still pitch, a little bit anyway. And I, unfortunately, there was a wedding going on here in the shul. So how could you be at a wedding and a baseball game at the same time? So I know that there's something that maybe I shouldn't reveal now because it's almost in the category of a confession. But right after the chuppah, I snuck out, went to the baseball game. Actually, we won the game, and I came back, and I went back to my seat as if nothing had happened. Which I think we won 2, so it was good. But baseball was a big part of my meeting lots of people over the course of the early years of my being here. So it was baseball, the commitment to visiting people in the hospital, and that was it. That was the way things actually started. Started very slowly, and I didn't have any game plan about building up a big, whatever you want to call it, whether it's a constituency or anything like that, because I didn't even know I was going to be staying here. What I did because I did it. That's it. There wasn't any ulterior motives. But it turned out that a lot of the people that I met in the hospital became good friends. A lot of the people that I met in the baseball field became good friends. And later on, when the shul opened, we gained lots of members from that cohort. But never in my life, and this I say with no small sense of pride, I never in my life ever asked an individual to leave their shul to join ours. That I considered always to be out of bounds. It was not the right thing to do. So I can't say to you, I didn't say in my, the back of my mind, I hoped that they would, but I would never actually do that because I considered it a breach of ethics. So, Gott hat geholfen, things started to move. There were a lot of people that were involved in this. I'm a little bit reluctant to mention names because if I mention name one, I don't want anyone to feel left out. Everyone in here and a lot of people that are not here were important in the development of the shul. And there was a critical point. The critical point came 1972, I think it was, when the math was sticking out at us very clearly. We could move. We had a place that we had our eye on. But all indications were that if we did not get expropriated where we were on Murray Street, 259 Murray Street, we would have no chance of building a new shul. Now, Murray Street in itself was a fascinating place. It was a shul in which the upstairs was as beautiful as the vestry room was ugly. The shul upstairs with its oak and the way it was made, it was a sight to see. It was a gorgeous shul. Unfortunately, it was a shul that was way beyond its time. Even in the place where we were at, a lot of the elderly people had great difficulty making it up the stairs to the women's section, which was a balcony. So we knew that the days of Mafziki Adas on Murray Street were numbered. We just didn't know whether it would be Mafziki Adas transformed and moved into a new place or Mafziki Adas closing its doors. So I sort of hedged my bets. There were people who were very active in trying to get the shul expropriated, and there were people that were very active in trying to get a new place for the shul. This area that we are at now was bought from the United Church. Irony of ironies would be 40 years later that I would be going all the way out to BC to fight the United Church on its wanting to engage in boycott and divestment of the State of Israel. Who could have known that? But we succeeded, not we. There were a number of people who worked hard on it. And maybe I should just tell you the names on that. Morton Toller and his cohorts, they knew the people that were up there in the hierarchy of the United Church, and they convinced them that they really didn't need this, and it would be a nice gesture to the community to sell it, fine. And then we had people who were working hard on the mayor and council to get the shul expropriated. Meanwhile, I didn't know whether we'd be successful or not, so I went to try out for a job in, of all places, Seattle, Washington. And this is an irony that doesn't happen that often, but after the Shabbat, they offered me the job. They must have been very desperate. Because not that many people go to the West Coast, at least not then. So that was before Starbucks came to Seattle, so there was not really any big attraction. Anyway, so I said to them, look, we have a very big day on Monday. Turns out Monday was the day after they had offered me the job. I said, Monday we're going to get the verdict from council as to whether they're expropriating the shul. And I told them as follows: if they expropriate, I'm not coming. If they don't expropriate, which means we'll have to close the doors, then I'm coming. So, Gothat geholfen, we came back, and we got the news that the city expropriated our land on Murray Street for $260,000, which meant that we had now a fighting chance to build a shul here. That was what we did. The crowning moment in my rabbinic life was the day that this shul opened. This was in 1973, or could be in 1974. 1973 is when we started, but we had the grand opening. It was an incredible event. The shul was packed all the way to the back. We had the Salmax entourage doing a special presentation. My parents were here. It was electric. This was almost like a reincarnation of a shul that was dying. And it's a moment that's really hard to forget, when Mafziki Adas basically was reborn. And from there, things happened. I'm going backwards in time and saying, okay, so what was it that made Mafziki Adas so successful at the time? I'm really hard pressed. I think a lot of it had to do with the people that we had running the office. We go back in time. I know that I'm dating myself, but in the old shul on Murray Street, we were so advanced that the radiator in the rabbi's office was actually on the ceiling. It doesn't do much for your self-esteem, but it does a lot for your steam. And we used to run flyers on Gestetner machines. And I remember how many shirts I had to throw into the garbage because the ink from the machine would splash on me. But I remember, too, working with people like Gidel Patz, who was here tonight, who was, at that point in time, the executive director of the shul in that area. Then, of course, we had other people like Helen Gilman. We had, later on, of course, G. Neymark and Blanche Osterer and Rita Diener and Kathy Loves. I hope I'm not missing. If I'm eliminating or missing anyone, please forgive me. It's not intentional. But if I had to basically pinpoint how well we did, I think a lot of it I would give credit to Jean Neymark, because she had this incredible ability to call people cold and convince them to join the shul. So every year, over the course of time, there's a natural attrition, unfortunately. People move away, people leave the shul for whatever reason. And Jean was always ahead of the curve. She'd start at the beginning of the summer and call people. Obviously, if they were not members, she would ask them to join. And it was great to see how she was able to get more and more people to come. And if there's anyone who really would be directly responsible for this recruiting to get people in, it was her. Now, during the course of that time, of course, things expanded. It's hard for you to believe, but there actually was a time that I used to come punctually to meetings. I used to come on time to meetings. And I used to stay for the entire meetings. I know it's hard to believe, but I got trained very quickly. I used to come to meetings on time, and then I would wait for half an hour or 3/4 until the meeting would start. So I learned to budget my time a little bit better and come a little bit later. It's a bad habit. I imagine I would tell you it's a bad habit, but I got into it honestly, unfortunately. And then over the course of time, when you're around for a long time, things start to happen. This was not planned, but over the course of the years, so I got involved in more and more things. And these all were things that, some of them just came out of nowhere. So for example, I'm looking back now, for 30 years I was doing television on what now is CTV, was CJOH. And I got into this purely by accident. How it happened was that they had, on Sunday, they had a group of four. One rabbi, a minister, a priest. At that point in time, they didn't even have imams around. It was three different Christian persuasions, and one was a United, and then there was a rabbi. I wasn't that rabbi, but then the rabbi who was Rabbi Friedberg of Agudas Israel, and just before he left, he called me and said, would I like to do that? So I said, okay. So I started it. Meanwhile, the program changed from 4 people to 2 people, so it was a rabbi and the United Minister. Then the United Minister left, and left me doing the thing on my own. But again, it was unplanned. When I came here, I had no visions of being in showbiz, no visions of being in television. I did a little bit of radio then. That was with CFRA, but that was in the time of Gord Atkinson. And he had called me once to say that he would like to have, before every yontif, he didn't use that word, he'd like to have some radio slot explaining the Jewish holy day, which I did for a while. At the same time, I was an equal opportunity offender. I actually did programs for the CBC, which were in the morning, and this was a rotation of religious people that I think it may have been 1 out of 10 or whatever it is. But 1 week, you would do 5 slots, so it was easy to do a few paintings a minute and a half. At the same time, I did some writing for the Ottawa Journal, which was one of the newspapers at the time, and that actually saved me from a lot of trouble, because there was a time that I wrote a piece in the Ottawa Journal called "Who's Responsible for Today's Killers, Robbers, etc." And somehow or other, the RCMP Gazette got a hold of the article, called me and asked me if I would grant permission for them to publish it in the RCMP Gazette. And I said, surely, not a problem. Then got up geholfen. A few weeks later, I get stopped on the highway for speeding by an RCMP fellow. So he looks at me and he says, are you the guy that wrote this piece? So I said, yeah. He says, go. So these interesting things that happened, I don't know what would have happened if he'd given me a ticket, we'd have to pay it, but that was a nice experience. So that journal actually stopped publishing. And then a number of interesting things happened, coincidental with this. What was very important to me was that at no point in time should I compromise what I'm doing in the shul. So even when I went studying for my PhD, no one knew what I was doing. I kept it very carefully below the radar. The only time they found out was on one Yom Kippur when I announced to them that my thesis defense is tomorrow, which is when it was. But I didn't want people to think, the rabbi's too busy, he's working on his thesis, he doesn't have time for me. And I basically said, I'm not telling anyone. If they find out, that's unfortunate, but it was very hard to find out because I was going at night and hardly anyone knew. That too is an interesting story because the first day I met my professor who used to live in the place which is now where Eric and Claire Wilner live, on Palmer Avenue. He asked me if I ever heard of Viktor Frankl. I said no. He said, don't you know he was here a month ago? At that point in time, I was still reading New York newspapers because I hadn't yet been weaned off the New York, the illness of once having been in New York, you can't live anywhere else but. So I said to him I hadn't, but he then said he recommended me I read a book or two. I read a book or two of his. I was absolutely fascinated with what he had to say, and what I did then was write a master's thesis on what he had to say. I wrote to him. I remember very clearly that I called the publisher and said, can I have his address? And he said, no, today I wouldn't have to ask you, just go Google it on 411 directory, whatever. But they said, well, if you send the letter to me, they'll send it over to him. So I sent a letter over, and a few weeks later I heard from Frankel. He called me out of the blue from Vienna and indicated to me that he would be coming to America. And I said, well, it's great, maybe we can meet. He was going to Rochester. So I said, he has the middle of working on my thesis for the PhD. I said, it's great, I'll go to visit you in Rochester. So and I remember him saying to me very clearly, he says, he only has 5 minutes. So fine, okay, good. So I went to Rochester, we drove there, we met him, we spent an entire afternoon together, probably 4 or 5 hours. We remained close friends from then until his death. He died a day after Princess Diana. And there was an interesting thing, it's a side thing, it's actually not too relevant to the discussion tonight, was that before I had a chance to go over to Vienna, because he had made me promise that I would look after his funeral, which I said, okay, but don't be in a hurry. And they had gone ahead and buried him very quickly. And the family then told me that the reason why they did it was because they saw the shenanigans that was going on with Princess Diana, and the city of Vienna wanted to give him a state funeral, and they were afraid of what would happen, so they basically went and buried him very quietly. I did go later on to Vienna and did the Hakomat Matseva for him, which in itself was an experience that I could talk about it later on. By the way, I hope I have time for you to ask questions, because I know that there are going to be things that I have not talked about that you'll want to hear about. I know this is a risk taken because for so many years there's so many things to hit on, and I'm not sure exactly what are the things that you're interested in. But that was another dimension of my life, and it actually, what was magical about it is that it fit in so well with being a rabbi. There were so many things about logotherapy, which is a system of therapy, which were very easily adaptable without playing the role of a shrink, because logotherapy is really simply common sense applied to life, changing of attitudes, focusing on meaning rather than on trivial stuff. And I was able to incorporate it in a lot of the speeches that I gave, and a lot of the things that I did and interacted with people, not analyzing them, because that's not what logotherapy is about. Logotherapy is about future orientation. Put your eye on the future, not forget about the past, but don't get wallowed in the past. So this worked out very well. Over the course of time, I met Frankel a few more times. The one that sticks out mostly is that I remember when we took him for Chula in Vienna. He was an interesting guy because he was a victim of the war, and he, for all intents and purposes, had left his Judaism, not his faith. He always was a man of faith, but had left his Judaism. And I think his being involved with a rabbi had something to do with his coming close. I remember one year he called me to tell me for the first time since the war that he was actually celebrating a Pesach Seder, which was, for him, a big thing. So that was another thing that, again, that happened purely by accident. Because I saw that I had a little bit of time and said, you know what, why not go a little bit further in an area of psychology which can only help in rabbinic life, which is what I did. At the same time, there were a lot of things that were happening in the community, lots of exciting things. Kashrut was something that took up lots of time. There were one crisis after another. We had them all through the years. I remember when I first came here, I wanted to make sure that what I was eating was kosher. So for a long time, I didn't eat anything because I hadn't gone to visit the slaughterhouses and to be comfortable. And I know that there were a lot of murmurings going on about, that rabbi, who does he think he is? He's not eating. And I know exactly when I broke my fast. This was the first year that I came, which was around a little bit before Rosh Hashanah. It was around the Chevra Kadisha dinner, so you could do the math. It was Chevra Kadisha dinner is usually in Kislev, so That year, the Rebbe Kaddish dinner was in the old Jewish Community Center, and I was sitting at the head table, and there was somebody at the end of the place who came walking over to me, and I said to the fellow who was sitting next to me, "This fellow is not coming here to say hello. He's coming to see if I've eaten." And he came over to me, he said hello, he saw that my plate was half empty, which meant that I had eaten something, and he immediately went back to his table and said, "The rabbi is eating," which I guess was a big moment in the history of Ottawa. But I started eating, at least publicly anyway. But we had interesting times at Varakasha. Sometimes we had really intense fights about issues, passionate ones, really ones. If I think in terms of when I was young, I was more prone to lose my cool. I very often, if I ever got angry, you could bet your bottom dollar it was at a Varakasha meeting. And if it was getting angry, it was probably getting angry at another rabbi, which is not a nice thing to do, but you want me to tell you the truth. I don't want to fudge. I'm sorry about it now. And the rabbis that I got angry at, they would get angry back. So we always were friends. It was not done with insulting. It was passionate concern for issues. Now, Kasha has taken a different route altogether. Rabbis don't get involved in policy that the lay people should get involved with. It would have been wise if we were looking backwards. It would have been smart to do that. I had to look about other things that I got involved with purely by accident. I got the call from a lady out of the blue in the early 1990s saying that they were starting a organ donation committee at the Kidney Foundation of Eastern Ontario. Would I like to chair it? So these are the type of the things that it's hard to say no. So I said yes, and that began a whole long involvement that continues to this very day in terms of organ and tissue donation. It started very simply, and then came the Canadian Council of Donation and Transplantation, which they asked me to sit on, which is a federal agency, and presently now I'm chairing the Tree Live Gift of Life Network, which is a provincial agency for organ and tissue donation. Divorce yourself from the fact that it's me doing it. It's quite incredible that a rabbi, no matter what his name is, should be the one responsible for, I'm not talking simply about, speaking about it. I'm talking about being responsible for the way hospitals are operating, for the way doctors are behaving, for the way the whole system is in place. And I look back, I pinch myself and say, how did this ever happen? It's just, as I told you at the very beginning, there's so many things that seemingly came out of nowhere that I just can't simply say it's coincidence. And through all this time, again I say, the congregation, to their credit, they could have easily said, like in many cases I've had rabbis telling me that if they did a little bit outside of the shul, the congregation would weigh down on them and say, hold it a minute, what's about us? Are we chopped liver? And before you knew it, they made the rabbi chopped liver. So there was never a complaint. On the contrary, there was more an appreciation of the fact of being involved. And this was a great source of encouragement. To be able to go home at night and know that you have a congregation which is not only quite accepting, but is also as friendly as is possible, and to know the families. The biggest thrills in the Rabbinic, outside of, in terms of not on a congregational level, but on a personal level, are the weddings that I did for parents, and then to be able to do weddings for their children. Soon it may even be possible for me to do weddings for grandchildren of grandparents that I married. It's a great thrill. The biggest pains, the biggest agonies, and one of the most difficult parts about being a rabbi in a place for so long is when, God forbid, people that you know for almost your entire adult life, they become not well, and then unfortunately they pass away. Those are excruciating. It's not easy. Obviously, the biggest burden falls on the family. But there are times when this happens that I think in terms of this being a devastating personal loss, because you go through 44 years of being involved with someone, being with them at their times of joy and times of travail, and when they pass from the world, it hits you right in the kishkas. So you need in this to be able to balance off the highs and the lows. Family obviously is very important in the rabbinate, and I've been twice blessed. I had a very terrific wife for 33 years who understood the demands of congregational life and never murmured about "you're hardly ever home." And then in the last 9+ years, been blessed with Leah, who came. She had the same travail that I had of leaving New York and coming here and sensing the exact same thing. And again, never complaining, you're never home, understanding what congregational life and its demands are. But in the main, it's been a congregation that has been, shall we say, incredibly, what's the right word to say? Incredibly close in so many different ways. And there are no end of funny stories about congregational life. The one that I like the best is the one that Dr. Andre Engel told me, which was a number of years ago when he went downstairs, the downstairs bathroom in the new shul, and there were kids there who were making mischief. One of them was my dear young son, Benjamin. So he looks at the Dr. Engel and he says, "You can't tell me what to do. My father owns this place." So the good doctor got a chuckle out of it. I still remember that to this very day was his take on the circumstance. My kids always felt very much at home here, and that's again thanks to you, who always welcomed them, give them knips and candies and everything that would make them feel warm and comfortable and fuzzy in the shul. You don't realize why I said in the beginning a lot of this is about you, because a rabbi, in order to function, can't have anxiety on his head. And I can say to you honestly that I don't think I've ever had an anxiety about the congregation. Yes, I'm worried about what's going to happen, but never on a personal level. I can't tell you that I haven't, over the course of time, had people who, to this very day, don't talk to me. And I can also tell you quite candidly that in most of those instances, it was because of mistakes that I made, not that they made. But I never was lazy about going to someone and saying, "Look, I made a mistake, and I hope that you will forgive." Most people have done so. There are a few who didn't, and to this very day it remains a lament. But I did whatever I could, and I still continue to do so, but it hasn't always succeeded. And sometimes the standards that I pushed myself into working with worked against me. I'll give you an example. There was one of the things that I've kept throughout my entire life is, and this again made me sound very surprising, I hardly ever took vacations. The only time that I took a vacation was I think the second year when I went on sabbatical to Israel, not sabbatical, when I took a 6-week trip to Israel. And then the other one was when I took a sabbatical, I think in 1985. And in 1985, even though I was on sabbatical, if anything happened in the shul, whether it was good or bad, it was a telephone call to whoever it was to wish them mazel tov or to extend condolences to them. God had geholfen. In one instance, I, for whatever reason, missed calling someone who had just suffered a loss. And obviously they had known that I called everyone, so they were so terribly insulted that they left the shul. My regret. But sometimes what happens if you can't keep up with it, you'll end up suffering because of it. But I don't. I regret forgetting that one, but I don't regret having done that. And to this very day, no matter how far away I am, I always am in touch, because I think that that's a rabbinic responsibility. If there's any way that you can be, it's getting more and more difficult for good reasons. I have, thank God, blessed with many grandchildren, mine and Leah's, and there are very many opportunities to go and to celebrate the things that are happening to them. Bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah, graduation, elementary, high school, soon and Mitzvah Hashem weddings. So that creates extra time demands, and again, the congregation has been very, very understanding, which is great. A few other things I have to share with you that stand out in my mind. Again, I got into this by accident. I was asked to co-chair the committee for Russian Jewry, and then somehow or other the person who was my partner that left the city, I ended up being the chair. And we did lots of things, including demonstrating in front of the Russian embassy. And I remember very clearly, after the gates were opened, that I asked the shul, and all of you were always great when it said, we have to go to march in front of the Soviet embassy. You were always there. And I said, we got to go march, and I hope that you'll be there. And then I said to them once, I want to go march right after Simchas Torah. That was the year when the doors opened. And they said to me, Rabbi, are you crazy? Why do you want to march now? Everything is fine. Anyway, I said, let's go. So we went, and we did something that we always did, which is to say, knock on the door of the Soviet embassy. And normally they ignored us. They taped us very nicely from their TVs in the windows. This time they actually opened the door. And the guy, he's looking at me and he's saying, what are you here for? Don't you know that everything is okay? So I said, yeah, but we... Hey. So the upshot of it is now that every year, come Hanukkah, I get a bottle of vodka from the Soviet ambassador. Quite interesting. Who claims that he's Jewish, by the way. So that was one of the interesting times. Another one, which probably from the point of view of the community at large, I would have to say was, there are two highlight events that stand on my mind. One of them was when we received the coat of arms. This again was a total accident, but again, no accidents. This is all, thank God. I got a call after Yom Kippur from a member of the shul saying that they had an interesting guy for after Yom Kippur. It's a big thing here which is actually not antithetical to Jewish tradition, to make a big celebration after Yom Kippur. It's based on a posuk in Tanakh that you should make a big celebration after Yom Kippur. And in that celebration happened to be a fellow by the name of Robert Watt, who was the chief herald of Canada. And that heraldry had just started because the Queen, in the repatriation of the Constitution, it was now okay to grant arms. So they called me and said, would you like to have, for the shul, a coat of arms? I said, you bet. So the guy called me, I called him back, and thus started an unfolding of what then became our major logo. We did a book on it. We have it on our Oron Kodesh. We give it out to bar and bar mitzvah people to wear with reasonable pride, because a coat of arms means that you're saying Canada is important to you, and Canada is saying is you are important to us. The evening that we had this was another one of those electric evenings. The place was packed. Everything had to work according to clockwork. I remember it's the only time in my life that I actually had to read part of a speech in French. I don't remember ever being nervous doing a speech in English. But that French part, I was shivering, I could tell you. And we had to submit everything to the Governor General's office. We weren't allowed to deviate one iota from the script. It was all timed and programmed, and everything had to be done exactly according to the plan. The preparation for it must have taken weeks. The actual execution of it took 32 minutes. And I remember then the Governor General then was the reigning official. He was such a marvelous individual who he made you feel so much at ease in his presence. He joked around with people. He kept the dignity of the office, but at the same time he introduced and infused a sense of friendship that everybody could feel his warmth. So that was a big moment in the shul. And then the other one had to do with my being the chaplain, honorary chaplain of the Royal Canadian Legion. How did I get this? Again, by accident. In 1990, the fellow who was the chaplain was a rabbi from Montreal. He used to come here, used to stay over in the shadow. He would come down in his talit to the memorial on the 11th. I can see why being in the shadow would be helpful because you don't have to worry about parking. Anyway, he decided that he wanted to retire, so now they had to appoint a new chaplain. How did I get the job? I didn't apply for it. I was the only rabbi then who was a Canadian citizen living in Ottawa. That's how I got the job. I'm serious. It's not a paying job. It's an honorary job. And it was real. Why was it so exciting? Because I met people who are genuine heroes, people who had given their lives for this country, and got such a deep sense of appreciation for who they are and the impact they had made, and the fact that we owe our freedoms to them. This was an incredible experience. But the one that really stands out was 4 or 5 years ago, when in my closing benediction, I made those words which rang out in a way that I had totally unanticipated. I spoke about the fact that it's not enough to say that we appreciate our troops, and we venerate them, and we support them. And basically said that we love our troops. And out of nowhere, people started clapping. Unanticipated. It was not intended that way. But when reporters afterwards asked me, why did I do this? I really couldn't even answer this. I just said, you know what? I have sensed, this is a climate thing that you sense, somehow or other there was a change that was going on in the minds of Canadians. Some, for a while, they were sort of laid back and saying, you know what? Not really a war. But then as things started to escalate and people realized that the best and the brightest of our nation were putting their lives on the line to save us, and we need to take cognizance of this more so than just in lip service and saying thank you very much. So you could sense what was happening within the country was this appreciation for them was welling up. And I tried to capture it with those words. And that was a magical moment. I had to keep my composure there because I didn't realize what was happening. But it was a moment that I will remember for the rest of my life. So, radio. How did I get involved in radio? CFRA. That started in 1994, again by accident. I used to go to Los Angeles with a dear colleague of mine, Rabbi Mayer. We used to go every year. We used to have a psychology Judaism conference. And Dennis Traeger then had a very popular radio program. It was called Religion on the Line. And every time I would go there, Levy was the engineer that I'd be one of his guests. He was a panic of a host. He would come in, and he would pick some abstract topic out of the blue, and we would talk about it for 2 hours. He usually had a Muslim and a Catholic on together with a rabbi. So one year, coming back, I said, you know what, maybe this would work here. So I went to Mark Mayhew, who was then running CFRA. CFRA was then going in a transition from music to news. News Talk. And I gave him this idea, and I think not that he liked it, but he didn't have anybody to look at the 10 to 11 slot on Sunday nights. And he said, you can have that. So I took it. And then a little while later, the person who had the slot from 9 to 10, he didn't work out, so they asked me if I would take that hour too. In retrospect, I probably shouldn't have said yes, but it was hard to say no. And I took it on, and lo and behold, it took off. For now it's close to 17, 18 years that I'm doing it, and I can tell you, Duncan God, I just was at the station today to do a pre-taping, and our program is actually the #1 rated program in 9 to 11 at night on Sunday night. So you can say to me, well, who listens anyway to the radio on Sunday night? That's a good question. One of the interesting things, I'm going backwards, I made a few notes just to make sure that I shouldn't forget some of the things that I might forget because the memory is not what it used to be. One that I recall, I think it must have been 4 or 5 years in, and I said, you know what, whether I stay here or not, it's a nice thing for the community to have a Shabbat boundary, known as an Eruv. At that point in time, there weren't that many rabbis in the city. Today we have lots and lots of them, which is nice. And so I approached the people that I had to approach, namely the people in City Hall, and I asked if they would be okay with it. They asked me what it was about, and I explained it to them. I'm not so sure that they understood it, but they said, okay. So I started the procedure. We then went to regional council we need the permission of the city in order to use in order to unite the city under one banner for the Eruv. And I thought I'd do a shortcut and get the regional council. Regional council absolutely refused to do so. So I had to go to the mayors of each of the cities. That's the way I got to know a lot of the mayors. And then City Council, Board of Control, I think it was called then, had to vote on it. And it was a slow news day. And there was a CBC reporter who was listening to the deliberations. And out of nowhere comes a letter from a rabbi saying we need permission from the city in order to set up a Shabbat boundary. And they didn't get it. They didn't understand it. So they called me up and they said they wanted to do a story on it. Fine. So the next day I go out with them, I show them the Eruv, I show them where the bridge is, where it ends, and I get then 2 irate calls from members of the congregation. One of them was, Rabbi, we left Europe, we left the ghetto, why are you ghettoizing the community again by putting a fence around? I said, relax, it's not really a fence, it's a mythical fence. I hope I assuaged him. The other one was actually an angry comment. Someone who called me up and said, hey Rabbi, I heard that you're now allowed to carry. Does that mean I shouldn't feel guilty when I carry my keys to the car on Shabbos? Which I found actually quite funny. So there you have it. I mean, when I look back at it, I'm hoping one day to, I'm not sure when I'm going to be able to do it, but I'm hoping one day to write a more extensive, it's not memoirs and autobiography, but just the story of the so many things that have happened whilst I've been here. Anybody else in the same position that probably would have happened too, maybe with a nuance of difference here and there. I think, for example, about how I got started on my writing. Actually, writing, the first book that I wrote came from the bathroom. And you may say, what are you talking about? I was at my sister's house and she had a book in the bathroom called The Best of Mark Twain. So I read it in one sitting, literally. And then I came out and I said to my sister, hold it, why don't we do the wit and wisdom of the Talmud? So she said, why not? So I called right away, I called the the editor of the series, her name was Edna Balinson. I said, Edna, what would you like her book, The Wit and Wisdom of the Talmud? So she said, yeah. Can you get me a transcript in 30 days? I said, you got it. What's the big deal? You take a snippet here, the snippet there. You have to pick your boat. You put the one-liners in, and you have Wit and Wisdom of the Talmud. I sent it to her, and that was my first book. But my first serious book came as a result of the passing of our son Ephraim, the Tesker. And I remember then the sense that I had, because I could see on the faces of everyone in the congregation the pain, not only in the congregation but outside the congregation, because thank God through what I was doing, I was, on a communication basis with lots of people, and I could sense how hurt they were, how much anguish and agony they had, and how all of them wanted to help. Even if I look back now, it was a very comforting feeling to have seen that at that time. But I wanted to do something in his memory, so I decided to do a commentary on Ethics of the Elders. And I wanted to do something which was a little bit different, so because Ethics of the Elders is actually one of the two books that has been most commented on, that and the Haggadah. You have thousands upon thousands who have done it. And I said, what am I going to do now, just to add to the hopper something where so many other people smarter than I have commented? So I decided I'll take an approach which no one that I knew of had actually taken, which is to see how the one Mishnah connects to the following one, and how it follows in a pattern, and how each chapter divides up accordingly. And basically what I was trying to do is get into the mindset of Rabbi, who did this, to see how he was thinking, why he ordered it the way he did, and what semblance of continuity did he see in this. So I did the first two chapters, and I sent it off to a publisher. His name was Feldheim. At that point in time, one of the better known publishers. And he said, this is very well done, but you're never going to be able to carry it through till the end, because the first two chapters are easy. Then chapters 3, 4, 5, and 6 are much more complicated. I knew in the back of my mind that he was right. But the moment he said, you can't do it, that's the moment I said, I'll show you. And so I worked on it very, very hard for quite a number of months. And that was the first book that I did, and that started the writing. Again, if I had lived in New York, and there were a number of times that I almost moved to New York, this could never have happened. And I thank all of you for whatever it is that I've been able to achieve. It's because of the ease, the harmony, the tranquility that has been afforded to myself and my first wife, my dear Leah, and our entire family. So I end by saying to all of you, thank you very much. So, yeah, I'll take questions. Yes, Jeff. That is true. Yeah, and that's true. It's interesting. Now, I thank you for bringing it up. How did that start? That started basically. It was a combination of circumstance and logotherapy, because this was at a time when people were talking about school bullying and how we got to stop the bullying, we got to do this, we got to do that, and a logotherapist would say, hold it a minute. You have here a situation where you're telling people not to do something, it's not going to succeed. In the same way as a person, let's say, has an existential vacuum, you're not going to succeed unless you give them a future focus. So if you ask a simple question, what is it that is the very antithesis of bullying, that if you infuse people with, the bullying will go away on its own? And that to me was acts of kindness. So that, and it was deliberately not, anytime anyone said random acts of kindness. Said, we're not doing here random, we're doing purposeful. We want to have a program of it. It resonated, it took off. Right now it's provincial, and we're working on it becoming national. And hopefully with a majority government, it'll be easier to achieve. Yeah. I wish I knew. I wish I knew how it started. I'm trying to think back. That's a very difficult thing. Chuck's question was, how did my relationship with Canadian Jewish Congress start? I guess, again, it's a question of being around for such a long time, and then, seeing the people and then asking me to do this, that, and the other. It started off simply with my being involved in the Religious and Interreligious Affairs Committee. And there we had lots of trouble with our co-religionists in difficult issues. That became an issue that we had to report to head office and to the board of directors. And so we got more and more involved through that, and then became the chair of the Religious and Interreligious Affairs Committee. Then we had these terrible blow-ups where we had to pull out and threaten to leave it, and that sort of started the ball rolling. And then it got, once you get in, they don't let you out. So I didn't get out until I finished, and even after I finished as co-president, I'm still at this point in time what they call, I don't know what this means, but the Rabbinic emissary for Canadian Jewish Congress, which means whenever they need a schlepper to do something. Yeah. Oh, I know what most likely I would have been a doctor. I would have been a doctor. I actually practiced medicine without a license, like I practiced, So I learned the terrain. So, for example, I can go to any hospital floor, and by just being on the floor, I know exactly what the range of problems the person might have, right? So I'm very smart. If I'm on the 4th floor and I see a woman, I wish her mazel tov. Because I know that, it's... but I've always been, that would have probably been the route that I would have taken. Maybe, they didn't pay that much. Yeah. Yeah, another one of those, right. I did that. You remember what year it was? No? No. Then you remind me of another one, which, that we have in our shul thing, the prayer for Canada. You know how that started around Meech Lake time. And that was, I guess, my first taste of big-time politics. Was I was very upset at the specter of Canada falling apart. So I gathered together signatures of about 30,000 clergy and a lot of them were from Quebec, by the way, basically saying that they wanted Canada to stay together. And in it, I also made the prayer for Canada in English and in French. We ended up giving that entire petition to Brian Mulroney, who was then the Prime Minister of Canada. I can't say that it had any effect on eventually what happened. But I think it was important for the Jewish community to be in the forefront and say, Canada is precious to us. There's nothing to do with the politics of anything, but we want Canada to stay together. I see, again, I thought I wouldn't make mention of names, but I think it's important. I hope I don't leave anyone out, but in terms of the transition of the shul from downtown to here, in the old Nasikia doesn't have a lot of interesting characters who made the shul go. And when we made the transition, the people that were really in the forefront were people like Saul Seslov, who was the president of the shul at the time, Rudy Apartiv, who was the president when I came, And one of the interesting stories I have that I kept on reminding Rudy when he was alive, and thank God he's here like Fumi is here tonight, is that when we came, we arrived in Ottawa around 3 o'clock in the morning. We didn't know who to call. We didn't have the key to the apartment that we were going into. So we didn't know what to do. Worst thing in the world you could do with your first day in the Rabbinic is wake up the president. Even though I know you can't call now. So we sniffed around the house. It turned out that the window in the front was open, so we actually snuck into the house. It was quite interesting. So it was really Potter from Salt Saslav, and of course Max Nadolny, and then his son took the reins and was instrumental in getting the city to expropriate the land. And we had Jack Cleek and Lawrence Sugarman, who were all involved at that very critical transition from the old to the new. And I hope that I'm not missing out on some of the key names at the time, but it was a very small committee of people who really didn't want to see the shul die and who gave countless hours and lots of expertise to make it happen. Wouldn't have happened otherwise. One or two more. Joel. Yeah, I actually did. This is a conscious thing. Somebody once asked me if I wanted to be a rabbi in a shul where everyone was Shomer Shabbat. So I know that it sounds a little bit odd to say, because I would obviously love everybody to be Shomer Shabbat, but then what do you need a rabbi for, right? So for me, it was important right from the get-go to emphasize that we're all in this together. Every Jew counts, and I didn't preach about it that much, but I think it was more important that the message should get across in terms of facts on the ground, and the way that we had a shul that was welcoming to everyone, whether they were black hat, or yarmulke, or no yarmulke when they came in. The shul had to be open to everyone. But that's, again, something that I probably picked up from my father. I remember once my father and I were walking to shul from our house. It was basically one long block. And there was a fellow who was coming towards us. And he saw my father, so he put on the yarmulke out of respect. And I was a curious kid. And I looked behind me after he had passed, and he had taken the yarmulke and put it back in his pocket, which said to me something quite interesting. That the person, they have respect. I didn't take it as negative, I took it as a positive. But there's so much good in people that it's ridiculous to say someone is better than someone else. We all have our imperfections. We all have our strengths, and it's something which it's natural that that's the way to be. And the idea of having a shul in which everyone is welcome is, to me, the only way to be. It's just something that went without question. So it wasn't even again a conscious thing to do something that went against my grain. It was something that was such fundamental, basically. I say it's getting hot. That means that the air conditioning isn't on. So I thank you unless there's any more questions, thank you very, very much.
I'd like to call on Stuart Lazier from the Society to present a token of our appreciation to Rabbi Bulka.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Bulka. On behalf of the Ottawa Jewish Historical Society and all of the friends and guests gathered here, I want to thank you very much for your fantastic talk this evening. This is a lifetime subscription to the New York Times that I hope you and your wife will enjoy. I'm joking. I think you mentioned your son's comments to Dr. Engel about him claiming that you owned this shul, and I think he was right. You may not own it in terms of title and fee, simple ownership, but in terms of the time that you've put in terms of the love that you put in, and that the shul has given back to you, I think that there was a spiritual ownership. And you have asked, well, why did Masikei Adas prosper through all those years? I think the answer is very clear. I won't give the answer.
Very much so.
You know, I'm a former shul president, so of course I have the president Vasiki the whole night giving me all kinds of advice. And what he did say is that we should conclude this portion by saying 1, 2, 3, Todah Rabbah. I don't know exactly how you do it, Rabbi, but is it one?
You can do it. Right.
1, 2, 3. Todah Rabbah.
Good.
That concludes the program, but before we go for dessert, I would like to thank the numerous people who have been responsible for putting this program on tonight. Elaine Brodsky, who's our executive secretary. Shirley Berman, who did massive amounts of work researching Rabbi Bulka's career. The staff of Masiki Adas, Harry was asking me whether we're paying for the room. Yes, we are. Probably too much, but that's what presidents talk about. And the Ottawa Jewish Bulletin for providing publicity. There are membership forms outside, and I do want to tell you, some of you are probably saying, wow, that was a really good presentation. I wish we could record that. Well, we have. We have visual recording there, and we have oral recording here. This is what we do as a society. We also record every eulogy. We are working very closely right now with putting all of the materials in the Jewish Archive, which is behind the Jewish Library at the JCC, online. And my dream, having read about what they've done in St. John, New Brunswick, is to have a place where people can come and visit every day to see the magnificent history of this community. So I urge you to join our society and watch us as we make history a very important part of this community. Thank you very much. You're free to go.